Hello, and welcome to Pines with Aquinas. My name is Father Gregory Pine, and I altered the intonation of my voice to make the beginning of this video sound different from the last one. And it is different because we're going to talk about a different subject, which is namely relativism, which got a lot of play maybe like 10 years ago, even up to 5 years ago, but it hasn't gotten as much play recently. And I wonder why. But maybe we can think about that together. We can think about that together in the episode that follows. So let's go. Okay, so here is the question from one, let's see, Connor Kurtz. Is relativism still the, quote, central problem for the faith today? And how should we, as both individuals and collectively as the church, go about combating it? All right, as to your question, is it still the central problem for the faith today? And how should we, as both individuals and collectively as the church, go about combating it? I don't know if it's the central problem for the church today. I think it's a central problem. And what do I think? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to look past like coronavirus and the church's response to it, which I've gotten a flavor for in the international setting whilst living in Switzerland. And I can tell you it causes a lot of people a lot of distress. But yes, that may be just a bit presentist, but it's the kind of thought that has haunted us for like the past 18, 19 months. So but I think that relativism is still a problem which merits redress. So why is it still a problem for the faith today? I think because it represents a kind of attack on one of the most fundamental inclinations or one of the most fundamental tendencies of the human heart. So okay, we are human beings. I'm assuming if you're watching this video that you're a human being. If you're a higher life form, wow, kudos for the condescension. If you're a lower life form, I mean, kudos for having opposable thumbs and the capacity to navigate the internet. I commend it to you as righteousness. But I assume, most of you would probably be human beings. And for human beings, right, we have these different aspects of our humanity, which we often will summarize when talking about themes apropos of St. Thomas Aquinas. So for instance, right, we have a body, and then we have these kind of lower powers, which we'll call the sense powers, like sense cognition and sense appetite. And then we have these higher powers, right? So intellect and will is the way by which we refer to them. And those higher powers incorporate the movements of the lower powers and humanize them. They bring them to a more kind of elevated expression in the context of a human life. So like animals, for instance. Again, hello to our animal viewers. So animals have sense cognition and sense appetite. But because they don't have intellect and will, those lower powers, in us, lower powers, aren't incorporated into a higher life. And so they only have a kind of base expression. It doesn't mean that your dog is terrible as a result. I'm just saying that they have a lower expression in animals than they do in men and women because we are of a more exalted nature. And as having a more exalted nature, we exalt everything that we touch. So like when you eat food, for instance, it becomes energy, which is a higher plane of existence than just being food, which is awesome. So think about that the next time you're digesting. So we are able to kind of spiritualize our human existence in a way that lower creatures are not. And when it comes to the inclinations that we experience in our bodies, which we talk about a lot, so like food and drink and sexual intercourse being the kind of most basic of instincts, but we can certainly list other movements of the human, of human desire and desire said there kind of analogically. So it can be like low or middle or high. The highest of these movements of human desire, these highest of inclinations would be movements to the true and to the good. So to like know what is universally true and to love what is universally good, because having an intellect and a will, we're capable of that. Our intellect is not limited to one particular true thing, and our will is not limited to one particular good thing. Both intellect and will are broken open to what is universally true and what is universally good. And that's what keeps us from settling from what is, less than the best or less than the utmost. Because our intellect and will are, as Yves Simone puts it, super determined. They're made for what is they will only ever be satisfied with what is truly and goodly satisfactory, okay? Which, Spoiler alert, that's God. So we'll sometimes describe in conversations about the natural law an inclination to know the truth about God and to live peaceably in society and to shun ignorance and to avoid offending those with whom we live. St. Thomas lists those in Prima Secundae, question 94. But this also kind of maps out for us fundamental human inclinations which lead to our flourishing, which lead to our happiness. So human life without the truth is a stunted life, is a life that has been adumbrated, a life that has been contracepted, a life that has been cut off from what makes it, in fact, to strive and to seek and to go after what gives it, what animates its aspirations or its tendencies. So in relativism, what you do is you effectively despair of the human capacity for truth, which is really to pervert the use of the human intellect. And in so doing, you end up settling for something less than the exalted or the most exalted of human aspirations. So I think that, yes, for that reason, relativism represents a grave, grave harm dealt against our humanity, and it stands to undermine or to pervert our human tendencies, our human inclinations towards those most exalted truths and goods which bring about in us genuine happiness, true liberty, the experience of a life that is blessed indeed. So then how do we go about combating relativism? The thing is, I think that there are people who are like theoretical relativists, but there are very few people who are practical relativists, because people are very willing to express their preferences, and they're very willing to acknowledge hard and fast truth claims where the rubber hits the road. So like, for instance, you'll find people who say, other minds might exist, might not exist, but they're completely content to talk to you and to entertain that conversation as a source of some, valid input. So they're not going to be like, I could have this conversation, but truth be told, I probably should bracket out everything that I learn from it or everything that I discover in the course of it, because it could have been projected by some, fanciful imagination of my own consciousness. So you'll find people affirming that in a philosophy class or from up the podium of a philosophy class, but very rarely will you find them kind of bearing it out in practice all the way down. And I don't think that people actually want to be relativists. I picked up this point from Professor Michael Gorman, who teaches at Catholic University and will often give talks about relativism for the Thomistic Institute, which are excellent, and you should listen to them. But he says that what people really want is they want it such, or they want the kind of political order to be such that your opinions or your truth claims can't be foisted upon me as like necessary or required or compulsory. So what they're really afraid of is violence, right, or coercion. And so they set up relativism as a way by which to trivialize truth claims so that none of them can be enforced, or so that none of them can be kind of like weaponized, which I think is a keen insight. So I think that in acknowledging that, we have a better sense of the situation and then a better way with which to engage our contemporaries, because they're not so much worried about a truth, right, which will place a claim on them, or a truth which could liberate them were they to give themselves to it. They're worried about violence, they're worried about intolerance, they're worried about bigotry. And so the only way by which to kind of break down those barriers is by love. And this is, one setting in which I will quote Hans Urs von Balthasar, where he says that love alone is credible, because by your love, you kind of commend to others the validity of your teaching. Whereas if you just try to bludgeon others with your teaching, you will not only turn them off to it, right, but you will more likely incline them to the contrary. So I think that when it comes to combating relativism, we can host, philosophical debates. Certainly we inform ourselves on a theoretical level as to what relativism is, so that we can be more alert when it crops up in conversation or in the public square. But then ultimately, it's like all things, we're going to make our way forward and help those who are somewhat adrift, in a sea of relativism, by loving them, right? By a credible witness. So the world, if it listens to teachers, says Pope Paul VI in Evangelii Nuntiandi, it's because those teachers are witnesses. And so there's no such thing as, just I don't know, getting other people to follow your opinions because you've mastered the arguments, right? Your arguments have to be fired by charity. I give the example sometimes of quote unquote pastoral Spanish. It was told to us in our third year of formation that we should have a facility with pastoral Spanish, which is to say, like, we should be able to hear confessions and celebrate Mass and then offer some kind of pastoral care in Spanish. What I soon discovered is that there's no such thing as pastoral Spanish. There might be like a specific vocabulary which is helpful in those settings, but you basically just need to be fluent in Spanish in order to be of service to people. So there's no such thing as like pastoral apologetics. You have to have a mastery of humanity, which is to say you have to be a virtuous person if your apologetic efforts are going to bear fruit, real, genuine fruit, conducted in the context of real, genuine human friendship and communion. And I think then when it comes to relativism, we testify to the truth of the faith which enlivens our minds and emboldens our hearts by the life that we live. And we commend an alternate view of reality by investing in it, right? We commend it by living it in a way that's credible. So yes, so I think that relativism is still an obstacle, it's still a hurdle, it's still something that confronts us as a human race, and specifically as a church. And I think the way by which we go about, confronting it is by informing our minds and enlivening our hearts in the context of a virtuous life, certainly rehearsing the arguments and talking amongst ourselves as how best to improve them, but then to be sent to our contemporaries as genuine witnesses who have seen the living God and who have been changed as a result. And please God for the better. All right, so that's all for this. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel. And if you haven't yet, please do check out Godsplaining, which is another podcast to which I contribute with 4 other Dominican friars, which is sweet. And lots of like practical hands-on stuff there about apologetics as well. The first episode that we ever recorded is called An Apology for Apologetics. The audio quality of that episode is dubious, but the content I think is decent. I look back on that and I'm not ashamed. So yeah, that's all from me. I'll catch you next time on one of these episodes. Until then, let's keep each other in prayer. Cheers.